Greetings and welcome to the Marin Coalition's first program for 2023 on the topic of Marins, farms, and ranches with our guests David Lewis, Andy Najarice, Stefan Parnay, Lily Verdone, and Nancy Scolari. I'm Scott Pinsky, chair of the Marin Coalition, and we thank you for being here today. Today's program will be on the state of ranching and farming in Marin, focused primarily on those privately held farm and ranch operations located in the county. I want to note that the program today is not designed to deal with issues surrounding the Point Reyes seashore and leased ranches in that area. Those topics we will hopefully be covering in a future program, and we'll let you know about that when we have that scheduled. But for today, our panelists will be discussing the economic and practical aspects of operating a privately held farming or ranching operation within the county. Let me just tell you a little bit of our next program before we introduce our speakers. Our next event will be March 23 at noon, and we'll deal with the topic of policing in Marin. Our confirmed speakers as of this point are the County Sheriff, Jamie Scardina, and San Rafael Police Chief, David Spiller. The event will be moderated by our friend, Noah Griffin. We expect this to be a very important and interesting topic. Again, that's March 23. And we'll send out notifications about that in our emails, and it'll also be posted soon on our website. That will be on Zoom at no cost. Lastly, just to announce, we are anticipating going back to live in-person events in April. We've been discussing this resumption of in-person events for many, many months and have decided against it up until now for various reasons. Obviously, health concerns being primarily among them. But we're hoping to go back to in-person in April. We'll be announcing that soon, and obviously you'll find information on that on our website. Okay, without further ado, let's get to our program. I'd like to introduce our moderator. That will be David Lewis. David is the director of the University of California Cooperative Extension Office in Marin County and the Watershed Management Advisor in the North Bay. He's a Carleton College graduate, and he holds a Master's of Science degree in International Agricultural Development from UC Davis. His training and background are in geology, soils, and watershed hydrology. In his role as a UCCE, county director, he oversees all research and extension programs in Marin County, bringing research and science-based information to bear on local community needs and issues. As Watershed Management Advisor, he develops and implements projects that integrate resource conservation with agricultural land use management. He's committed to developing and disseminating the tools and practices that support beneficial contributions of working landscapes to local economies and the environment. It's now my pleasure to introduce, as your moderator, David Lewis.
Scott, thank you, and thank the Marin Coalition for this opportunity to come before you and with a great group of participants, attendees in the webinar to bring a panel that I think will be really interesting and exciting, not only for those attending, listening and asking questions, but for us that work together. We don't often pause to reflect and think about new challenges and opportunities. And so as you learn about our organizations and our agencies, know that we've been prompted and we're bringing some new or ongoing difficult challenges and opportunities. And we're going to have a discussion about those as we wrap up our panel presentation. But to start, I've been asked to kind of set the stage for our panelists. So allow me to share and go through a few slides just to give you context about agriculture in Marin, farming and ranching as it currently exists. So bear with me just 1 minute. And I'll just start with a insectary or field of wildflowers. It's actually at the Hedron Meadery. This is actually a crop, but just want you to appreciate that we're going to talk about diversification of crops in Marin and how stewardship and natural resource conservation goes on. Basically, many objectives for the same working landscape, and that'll be a theme I think we'll come back to over time. But I just want to, again, just walk through a few facts and figures for you. These numbers come from either the USDA's Census on Agriculture. The last one was done in 2017. The newest one, 2022, is being finalized. Some of these figures also come from what's called the Marin Crop Report, a report put out by one of our panelists and his agency, and we'll have him explain that here in a minute. But annually there's a Marin Crop Report. So I just want to pause and have you appreciate, the numbers of farms, the general acreage, the size of those farms. I also really want to stress this third major bullet. Marin is predominantly a livestock agriculture setting and county. There's not a lot of water for irrigation. There's also not a lot of types of soils that you would do irrigated ag on. However, it is really conducive to grazing livestock and dairy production because of its close proximity to the coast. It has a marine influence that's really useful and keeps things cool, keeps the grasses growing longer into the season. So just think about that. I hope also you're taking a minute to read that last bullet and appreciate kind of the net farm income as reported. Just some other things and maybe some springboards for our panelists, and they can be seeing these figures and thinking about this. But very exciting organic certification programs in Marin, and Marin really leads the state, and to some degrees even national figures on percentage of acreage that is certified organic. And again, our panelists with Ag Weights and Measures can talk more about that and how that came about. But again, just to point out, we have very, very few acres. Remember, previous slide, there were 140,000 acres total. If you look here then at these last three bullets, you can see acreage in vegetables and fruit and wine grapes and other nursery products really don't amount to more than about 600 total, if even that high, of that 140,000. And then just some other things to be thinking about, and as we continue to diversify the types of crops and the ways in which direct sales and niche marketing and making the products locally available directly to consumers from the farmer, we also want to be thinking about diversifying who's farming and the ownership and agency of those farms. And so it's just nice to have these kind of statistics and then begin to set goals in Marin. And those are some other things around justice and equity and diversity that we'll be talking about as well. I do want to pause and share some ideas about the fact that that 140 acres of open connected working landscape isn't by accident. This is a map directly from Marin County's development code. It shows the 4 environmental corridors working from west to east. From the coast inland, there's a coastal corridor. There's an inland rural corridor. So that's starting with the green and going into the light yellow. And then there's a light pink, that's your city-centered corridor, where you can imagine the 11 municipalities and the more densely urban residential areas are. There's also a Baylands corridor. And this is again from the development code and from the general plan, written in 2007 and updated a little bit in 2010. But the open areas, that coastal, the inland rural, and the Baylands corridor had a different trajectory and horizon coming out of World War II and into the 50s, where across Marin there were plans for 40 and 50,000 units, with roads running, even a highway running from east to west, connecting West Marin with East Marin. And all of that was halted, stopped, prevented by a change in opinion and a change in perspective that many leaders, we could go into that history and discuss it, but many leaders stepped in and changed even the composition of the Board of Supervisors in the late 60s, early 70s. And by 1972, you had a minimum parcel size and a real purpose to protect the open connected agricultural lands across Marin and other lands as well, public parks and open space, even federal parks. So there could have been a different landscape and look to Marin, and that's the point to make here. And if you do ever get a hold of Farming on the Edge, there are some copies here and there available, and you can find them. It's a great book by John Hart that tells that story of turning the page and deciding to protect and ask agriculture to be a partner in land conservation and protect against development. So I'm going to stop that share, and we're going to begin with our panelists. And I'm really fortunate to ask Andy Najaris to come up, and each panelist is going to take 5 to 10 minutes and share the organization. So Andy Najaris is the CEO for the Agricultural Institute of Marin. AIM itself has been an innovator and a leader, looks to around the Bay Area and even across the state for how to run farmers markets and make connections between consumers and producers. And Andy is an incredible food systems champion. You have his introduction there and his bio. Really great combination of experience from working on national food system access to then now focusing here locally. And I just, Andy, we can't thank you enough for what you do for AIM, but you give yourself in so many other ways to align local, state, and national policies around an equitable food system. And I think you'll understand what I mean by that introduction when you hear from Andy now. And so, Andy, thank you for joining us and all that AIM does.
Great. Well, thank you so much, David, for that warm introduction. And thanks to my co-panelists. We have a really great team working across Marin County to improve and strengthen our agricultural system. So I'm going to talk a little bit today for a few minutes about how Marin's farms and ranches fit within our local and regional food system and how we can provide a platform for eaters and shoppers and learners to benefit from the commodities that we produce here. So let me get my screen up to share this. So Agricultural Institute of Marin, we go by AIM for short. We are really focused on how we can create access to local and regionally produced foods for our residents, eaters, and shoppers here within Marin County. While we're based in Marin, we do operate on a larger geographic focus across 3 Bay Area counties, Marin, Alameda, and San Francisco counties. But we ultimately work to educate, inspire, and connect communities with responsible farmers and producers as part of a healthy, earth-friendly, equitable local and regional food system. And you may recall that at the beginning of the pandemic, when local grocery store shelves didn't have fruits and vegetables or many foods, just to the fragility of our national food systems, well, our local food systems were more resilient and have been able to provide incredible opportunities for our producers, as well as for eaters and shoppers to access local foods and fibers. So Ag Institute of Marin, we were founded about 39 years ago when we first had our initial farmers market, the Thursday market at the Marin Civic Center, and we have grown over time. I joined AIM in 2018, so it'll be my 5-year anniversary soon. We operate 9 certified farmers markets across the Bay Area and work with a network of about 400 small to mid-sized farmers, fishers, ranchers, food makers, and artisans who come from about 43 of the 58 California counties. We also provide education, food access, policy, and related services to strengthen opportunities for producers, as well as to promote equitable food access. We work with UC Cooperative Extension on the Marin Food Policy Council. We're the fiscal sponsor, along with a number of other networks focused on policy and advocacy. We're in the midst, or actually in the 3rd year of our 3-year strategic plan as an organization guided by our majority farmer board of directors. And we have 4 overarching goals as an organization to create a regional alternative to the large-scale industrial agriculture complex. Our model is to connect producers directly with eaters and shoppers through short supply chains. We also advocate for a healthier, equitable food and farming system and promote zero waste and sustainable practices. We're likewise focused on increasing access to financial and related opportunities, access to markets and so forth for small to mid-sized producers, especially socially disadvantaged producers and producers of color. And lastly, we focus on expanding impact and access to educational and food access programs by inclusively serving more communities throughout the Bay Area. We're guided by our principles of racial equity in our entire food system as well. So everyone has the opportunity to succeed. We're most known for our certified farmers markets. So this is an aerial shot of our Sunday Marin Civic Center Farmers Market, one of the largest in the state. We have about 240 selling spaces for producers to be at the market. In addition, as I mentioned, we have our Thursday Farmers Market. We also run seasonal markets in Point Reyes at Toby's and then downtown San Rafael. We have 2 markets in San Francisco and 3 markets in the East Bay in Oakland, Newark, and Hayward. And having multiple markets in geographic areas just provides more access and opportunities for our local producers and eaters and shoppers to buy local and responsible foods. We run a farm audit program where we visit every farm, ranch, fisher facility, as well as egg seller and cheesemaker to ensure that everything that they plan to bring to market, that they've grown or produced themselves. And we're also focusing on environmental quality as well with partnerships with MALT and the Marin Resource Conservation District. And then we focus on making sure that all people can be able to access and afford to shop at the market. And we do this by operating CalFresh, formerly called the Food Stamp Program, where we provide benefits where people can shop the farmers market. We match them per day up to $10 for free fruits and vegetables. And we process over $1 million in benefits per year at our markets. All of that money goes directly back to our local farmers and producers. As an educational organization, we believe that young people can have transformational experiences by visiting local farms and ranches to learn how food is grown and where food is grown. And we do this through our Dig in Education program. We partner with local schools and community groups to bring school-age children and parents either to visit a farm, to come to the farmers market for a tour, or where we go into classrooms and teach children about sustainability, the difference between organic and conventional produce, and the importance of supporting local food systems, and why you won't find things like pineapples or bananas at the farmers market. We explain California grown produce and seasonality. Our services are offered for free, although we do charge $18 per student for a farm tour. We do provide scholarships, but all of that money that we collect is to pay the farmer for their time. And we work currently with about 8 different farms, 6 of those located in Marin County, to create specific farm tours and learning opportunities for youth and families. Despite the popularity of farmers markets across the Bay Area, we realize that there are populations that may not be able to access the markets. So our research has shown that price and mobility are 2 of the biggest barriers to accessing local healthy foods. In response, in August 2018, we launched the Roll and Root Mobile Farmers Market, where we bring the farmers market experience directly to senior communities, low-income housing sites, and places that lack food access. And that actually includes West Marin, along the coastal towns of Tamales, Marshall, and Point Reyes. We serve about 6,500 people per year and offer community education and enrichment programs as well, so people can learn how to cook healthy foods and shop seasonally with confidence. As part of our mission to focus on equity, we're investing resources to specifically help producers who identify as Black, Indigenous, or other people of color to help overcome longstanding systems and barriers to accessing markets. And 2 ways that we do that are first our Racial Equity Fund. So we raise funding and we award startup grants to beginning Black and brown farmers and food makers to join the farmers market to help set them up for success. We also run an incubator booth program in partnership with Kitchen Table Advisors in Alba, which is actually based in the Salinas area, where we provide the opportunity for first generation immigrant, largely former farm workers from Mexico who are starting their own businesses, to be able to learn about the business of selling at markets and create opportunities for them to go to market. While we run a large list of programs and initiatives, what I'm really especially excited to share is that all of these programs and services will be housed at our future home that we call the Center for Food and Agriculture. This will become our permanent farmers market that we're going to construct in partnership with the County of Marin, the Marin Civic Center on the site that's more commonly known as the Christmas Tree Lot. This started as a ballot measure in 2014, approved by 84% of the voters. We put a pause on it over time, and when I joined the organization in 2018, working with our board of directors, we developed a new business model for the center and really got back to our roots to think about how can we preserve the incredible experience of the farmers market, but offer more amenities, focus on zero waste and sustainability principles, and assure that the farmers market experience will be here for future generations. We're planning to open the new center in 2025, and we're currently in the midst of our preliminary environmental study as part of the CEQA process. So in just a few short weeks, we will have our preliminary environmental study results to share. We're expecting a mitigated negative declaration for those of you familiar with CEQA, but there will be an opportunity for public comment if you'd like to learn more about what we're doing. But essentially what we're doing is taking the farmers market experience that we all know and love and making it more sustainable and permanent. We will have permanent amenities, including overhead coverage and canopies to provide protection during inclement weather. We'll have educational facilities, including a teaching kitchen, indoor, outdoor classroom and learning spaces, as well as better wayfinding and services to support the farmers market. So that way all people, especially the older adult population, to make it an easier experience and better to navigate, and having more services to support our small family farmers to ensure their businesses are viable. We'll also assure that we have a marketplace for producers that are using climate smart practices in carbon farming to sell their products. So just really excited to share with all of you today about what we're working on and just demonstrate the connections between where food is grown and how people can access it. So thank you so much.
Andy, thank you. And we'll have time at the end again and bring you back up with everyone else to do some deeper exploration and discussion on many of those topics. So thank you. Next, I'd like to invite up Stefan Parnay, who is Marin County's Agricultural Commissioner and Director of Ag Weights and Measures. Stefan's got nearly 30 years of experience across Marin and Sonoma working for the agricultural commissioner's offices across both counties. He came to Marin's office in 2010, and in the last 2 years has now become the agricultural commissioner. And I just want to say, Stefan, it's been wonderful to have you step into that role and have you further advance your problem solving and abilities to grow allies and partners around things like drought response and weed management. Again, you all have his bio and you can read that, but we are just really benefiting so much from Stefan's adept leadership and ability to support the Marin agricultural community. So with that, there's so many things for you to share. Some things we don't even know about ag weights and measures that I think are really useful for people to know about. And also then maybe have you talk a little bit about organic certification and some of those other points brought up in the intro. Thank you, Stefan.
Excellent. Thank you, David. Appreciate the introduction, and hello, everybody. And I would like to thank the Marin Coalition for putting this together, giving us an opportunity to talk about our programs and about the future of agriculture. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen right now. And did that come up okay or no?
Yeah, it came up fine.
Okay, so I'll just kind of jump in here. So there's with the Department of Agriculture Weights and Measures, there's actually two divisions. There's the Agriculture Division and there's the Weights and Measures Division. And our mission is to serve the public's interest by ensuring equity in the marketplace, promoting and protecting agriculture, protecting environmental quality, and the health and welfare of Marin County's residents. And just a very brief history on the agricultural commissioner system. It's been in place for about 140 years, actually started in the early 1880s. And at that time, we weren't called agricultural commissioners, we were called horticultural commissioners. And so in 1929, that name, the title was changed back to agricultural commissioner. And there is an agricultural commissioner in every county in California. And our programs are generally regulatory, but I've always looked at them really through a service-oriented lens. And in that, we have a very strong philosophy of education, outreach, and collaboration with our business community, with the agricultural industry, and any of those that we do regulate. And our programs are really broken down into 3 pillars. There's consumer protection, environmental protection, and sustainable agriculture. And with sustainable, or with weights and measures, a lot of people don't know what weights and measures means. And really what it is it has everything to do with consumer protection. And so a couple of the primary programs that we're responsible for are, one is the price verification program, where we go to all of the retail businesses in the county. And by law, those businesses are required to offer you the lowest advertised or posted price. And so we basically verify that they are doing that. Additionally, we also inspect a variety of different devices and scales and meters. And so, for example, if you're getting gas at the gas station and you pump 10 gallons in, how do you know you're getting 10 gallons? Well, my department is out there inspecting those meters to confirm that they are indeed accurate in pumping the correct amount of fuel. Additionally, for example, for more tied to agriculture, is a number of different types of scales. So when you're at the farmer's market, there are scales at the farmer's market for that produce that needs to be weighed. And so all of those scales are tested by my department and are confirmed that they are accurate. Additionally, we do inspections on livestock scales to ensure that the animals that are weighed on those scales is accurate. And then on a daily basis for those, when we're going to the grocery store and you're at the deli section and you're buying cheese or buying meats, there's the scales there in the deli section. All those scales are also tested and verified. And so, and even something maybe a little different that you might not know, if you hop into a taxi, which obviously there's Lyft and other ways to get around, but if you hop into a taxi, how do you know the meter that is in there that tells them how far they've gone is accurate? Well, we test those also on an annual basis. And so on the screen there is a yellow, basically seal. And that seal basically states that that device has been inspected and has passed and is accurate. So if you don't see that seal on a device, then call our department, because that means that either the seal fell off and we need to get a new one up there and have that device tested, or there could be another problem. So I'll move over into the agricultural area. And the first one here is the Marin Organic Certified Agriculture, otherwise known as MOCA. And this is our biggest program. There are only 3 counties in California that have a certified organic program and are an accredited certified agency through the USDA National Organic Program. And so we've actually been a certifier for over 20 years now, for quite a long time. And so there's a process that would take a lot longer than the time I have now to explain the certification process, but maybe in the Q&A, if there's a question, maybe I can answer it then. In regards to farmers markets, we oversee all the farmers markets in the county. And so that includes working with the farm market managers, as well as working with the producers who sell at those markets. And the second pillar is environmental protection. And we have a very strong interest in recommending integrated pest management approaches to dealing with pests in the county, especially pests that are going to affect agriculture. And that could be residents coming into our department asking, what is this pest? How do we control it? To an agricultural producer, bringing in an invasive weed and saying, hey, I have this weed. What's the best way to manage and control it? And then the next program here under environmental protection is pesticide use enforcement. So our department oversees the use of pesticides throughout the county, and that is from anyone that's using pesticides, from a maintenance gardener that's using pesticides in a residential setting, to an agricultural producer, to a structural operator that is using or is maybe doing some treatments around a house, or is potentially fumigating a house. We do inspections on all those businesses. And then another area that's really critical is, and I list here sudden oak death and glassy wing sharpshooter, and then other pests. We do a lot of work with pest detection and pest management, pest exclusion. There's trapping that gets done. There's inspections of plants that come in through the various carriers like UPS and FedEx. And then there's also a lot of plant shipments that come from Southern California, where a number of pests are, and we inspect those at the nurseries that they are delivered to. And the bottom left there, that's the glassy wing sharpshooter, and that is about the adults about the width of a dime. And on the bottom right, that's a Mediterranean fruit fly, which I'm sure some of you, or many of you, are probably familiar with. All right, a few more environmental protection programs. We have a vineyard erosion and sediment control program. As David said, our presence in the vineyards, as far as acres of vineyards, is very small, less than 200 acres. And to give you some context, Sonoma County has over 62,000 acres, and Napa County has over 40,000 acres. And this program kind of speaks for itself. The goal here is to prevent erosion and not allow sediment to get into our waterways. We also oversee all of the nurseries in the county, and as well as doing some seed inspection. And I'll mention our livestock protection program, which is kind of a unique program. It's working with the agricultural industry, and the goal here is it's a non-lethal program, and it's a cost share program to support ranchers in putting up new fencing or repairing fencing, supporting guard animals, and maybe using scare devices to keep predators away. And so in that picture on the bottom of the slide, you'll see there's a couple of guardian dogs that are protecting a large flock of sheep. All right, the third pillar is sustainable agriculture. And this pillar, basically, you can see the programs, I've already covered them. So really, there's a lot of crossover between the three different areas. And my last slide here is really, the future of agriculture, and just thinking about the last several years and the challenges that our agricultural industry has had to endure. And just thinking with COVID and the extreme drought conditions for 3 years, the cost of fuel, the cost of extraordinary high cost of feed, it's really made it extremely difficult for our agricultural producers to remain viable. And so because of that, and part of our responsibility, my departments, as well as the partners that are here, is really helping to promote and protect agriculture. And so through combined support, we've been really successful at creating a number of programs to help keep farmers productive and viable. And so we're always looking for opportunities to do that. And it just, there's so much unknown, and it's just really difficult. Thinking even just recently with the flooding and the high winds, and many of our ranchers suffered, a lot of damage because of that. So I think I will stop it there. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them into the Q&A.
Great, Stefan. Thank you. So we'll keep moving. We've got 3 more panel presentations, and I'll ask Lily Verdun to join us, who is the new executive director for the Marin Agricultural Land Trust. Still in her first year, but already providing amazing stability and really strengthening and supporting her team to do incredible stewardship work. But Lily's not new to stewardship and conservation on working lands, with experience from the Nature Conservancy and Coastal Quest. So while new to Malt, she's bringing lots of experience both in the North Bay and elsewhere. And we're just really grateful, Lily, for you to be joining the Marin community and bringing your leadership. Thank you, Lily.
Thanks, David. I appreciate it. And thanks for having me as part of this great panel of partners and colleagues. So I'm excited to share a little bit about where Malt is going now. And as David said, I'm new to the organization. I've pull up my screen. I started it in August, so not quite 6 months on as the executive director for the Marin Agricultural Land Trust. And I think one of the pieces that I think is really important to start with is our history and our origin story. And David, you spoke earlier about farming on the edge and the history of Marin agriculture and zoning. And this is really where Malt was born out of, was this idea that that we needed to preserve the farmland and the landscapes of West Marin, and how do we do that? And Malt was brought together by two amazing women leaders in the field and entrepreneurs. Phyllis Faber, who sadly we lost last month, and Ellen Strauss came together over 40 years ago as a environmentalist and as an agriculturalist. And they brought the two communities together to really create a model and build a successful organization around how we protect land for both people and nature and those outcomes. And so we're here today with more than 55,000 acres of agricultural land that's been protected through easements by Malt and by all of our supporters and our partners. And it's been a really successful organizational model that now is spread across the United States. So Malt was the first agricultural land trust in the United States. And now there are many, many agricultural land trusts across the United States using our same model, as well as other land trusts. And our model is mainly using agricultural easements to protect farmland. And so that's working with private landowners to purchase development rights and maintain the farmland in working agricultural land in perpetuity. And so we do that. And then we also work to help steward the land and support the farmers and ranchers continue agriculture. And so that's in a place that we're at right now, is that we're looking at, now that we've been so successful and we've protected more than half of the agricultural land in Marin, how do we then help steward the lands and really build up that part of our work? So our impact to date is really significant. As I said, over 55,000 acres protected. We have 92 agricultural conservation easements, a significant amount of investment put into Marin in both it's the private lands, and the public benefit of private lands is significant. So we're not just protecting agriculture, we're protecting all of that falls under the umbrella of what agriculture is. And so that is the economic aspect, the local jobs, the food and fiber, the habitat benefits of wetlands and creeks and streams and forests. And then also now, as we get more into the understanding of the climate impacts and carbon sequestration and all of these benefits that our working lands provide the community. So this is a map of where Malt has protected to date. And so you can see that the dark green areas are those 55,000 acres and over 90 easements. And we're working actively to protect more lands. But also, again, it's that stewardship aspect now. And this is a common area that land trusts get into, where you're doing a heavy amount of acquisition and the protection piece in the first part of your organization. And then once you hit that tipping point, then the organization thinks about how we then better steward the lands, how we shift into that stewardship mode. And so how do we take care of the lands, make sure that the lands are resourced, thinking about, for us as an agricultural land trust, how do we help our community and see what our community needs and resource that. And including better climate smart practices for farming and ranching, thinking about ways to benefit building resilience, whether it's climate resilience or fire resilience. thinking about how to improve on the ground resources for the community. So it is economically viable to stay in agriculture, but then also there's multiple benefits to that agriculture. So because I'm coming on new to the organization and have been out spending my last 6 months on a listening tour. And I've been so fortunate to be able to spend this time really talking to the community, talking to farmers and ranchers, supporters, community members, people who care about malt, people who maybe don't care as much about malt, but want to see some change happen. And so I've been on a listening tour, and it's been really such a benefit for me. And I feel like it's been a really special time for me that I won't ever get back. And so I'm taking it in as much as I can. And through that, I've really been able to hear from people about what malt can do, what we've done well in the past, what we can do better in the future, how people see us, how we see ourselves in the community. And through that, I've really taken the time to think about what our strategy is moving forward and how can we fulfill our mission, which is to permanently protect Marin's agricultural land for agricultural use, and do that in a way that is timely and reflecting on the urgency that is now and is needed in the community. And so because of that, the organization is focusing on 5 pillars of work. And the first is to preserve agriculture. And this is really conserving the most important farmland to support thriving and economically viable agriculture in Marin. And this is not just preserving the landscape, that's part of it, but also thinking outside of that box of the preservation and thinking about how we can help create viable agricultural community through the economy, through other pieces of it that build up what is agriculture in Marin. The second pillar is protecting biodiversity. And so to protect and restore and improve agricultural lands to benefit wildlife habitat, connectivity, soil health, and water quality. So all those things that you get under the umbrella of protecting agriculture, benefiting that both for the public benefit and then also for the private benefit. So increasing soil health means an increased output in your agricultural commodity. The third component of the work that we're focusing on is building climate resilience. And so we're going to continue to build on incentivizing and accelerating climate smart agricultural practices and nature-based solutions to deliver climate resilience. And this has been something that we've seen a lot of and been able to really dig into as an organization around the drought. And we'll continue to develop that and think of ways and grow this work, this body of work within the organization. And the fourth piece is connecting our community. So being able to inspire and build a constituency to increase awareness of the public benefit of protecting agricultural land. And so it really means getting people together, bringing people out on the land. We have a series of events and hikes and really being able to connect and resource the community and be the glue in the fabric of the community and get back to our roots as an organization. And then the fifth pillar is strengthening our organization. And so malt has been through our ups and downs as all organizations have, and our goal now is looking forward and positioning the organization for success in the future. And how do we do that? How do we build strong governance? How do we build and retain a great, strong technical staff as a resource to our community? All those pieces are things that we're going to be digging into. And so how do we work? I talked a little bit about the agricultural conservation easements. And this is our main area of work and what we've been doing historically, and we're continuing to do that. We closed our first easement in several months back in August, which is a 723-acre McDowell Ranch. And we have a pipeline of projects that are getting ready or are in some deal of or stage of the deal for closing over 3,600 acres of farmland. And that'll happen in the next few years. And then with those easements, we monitor our easements on an annual basis, and we have a list of criteria that the easements have to live up to as part of our agreement with the landowner, as well as our accreditation from the Land Trust Alliance, which is a national land trust organization that accredits land trusts throughout the United States. We also work through doing land stewardship, which includes these incentive programs. And so helping farmers and ranchers adapt to what's happening on the ground, as well as the economic pressure that's happening right now, which we've seen a lot with inflation. So one of the ways that we've done that is through our drought resilience and water security program, the DRAWS program, which we was born out of an emergency, was born out of the drought, and about 2 years ago, the organization realized this, was hearing from our community that there was that farmers and ranchers needed help, and how can we help them? And so we allocated funding to create a small grants program that was available to all farmers and ranchers across Marin County, and that for projects to help offset the cost of projects to create water and drought resilience and water security. And so this has been a really successful program. We've refunded it a few times, and we're just coming up onto the 2nd anniversary of the program. And we're thinking through what's next. What else can we do to help out? How else can we incentivize and accelerate this type of program? Another program that we have, which is really unique to us as a land trust working in the agricultural space, is that we have stewardship assistance programs. And this is just for our easement holders. And so it's annual allocation of funds that's available to easement holders to help upgrade their operations and on the ground management of their agricultural practices. We have a series of events and community engagement. We have a lot of public hikes that we're doing and really growing this back up after a hiatus of COVID and several other things. We've got 3 spring hikes open for the public, scheduled in April, and then another one coming up, I believe, in May. And so that's really exciting to get people out on the land, be able to see wildflowers and meet farmers and ranchers out in the community. We have ag community gatherings where we bring the ag community together to talk about topics, but also just to have a time to connect, which is pretty unusual. We had a really successful one the other week where we had over 60 people coming together and having coffee and pastries and making those connections, which is really such a critical thing for us. And then we also have supporter events and to be able to grow our reach and expand the interest of what we're doing out here in Marin County. And then, as we see today with this fantastic panel, we have a huge amount of depending on our partners. And so we have fantastic ag and conservation partners, including everybody on the call here today. And then we also have a buy local resource on our website, and we're really growing that as well. So then people can understand where we can get these commodities that are being farmed and ranched out on the properties. How do you connect them and actually buy and resource the local food and fiber and that's grown out here in our backyard. So I'll just end with the challenges and opportunities, since this was something that I think is relevant right now. I do feel like that malt, but also the entire agricultural community in West Marin is thinking about is, what does agriculture look like in the future? And for malt, one of the pieces that we're really working on is continuing to listen and to be a resource to our community. And so this is a really big piece of what we do. We're a community-based organization, and we need to be there for our community and offer support and resources to them. So that's a priority for us moving forward. We're also working to implement durable agricultural conservation outcomes, and that looks like a lot of different things in a lot of different places. And it's going to be something that we'll continue to work on and help steward throughout the years. We are going to continue to build and grow trust, and not only to grow trust to show the work that we do and that it is viable and important, but also to build and grow trust within the agricultural community so we can continue to protect land in the future. We want to be able to tell compelling stories about the multiple benefits of agricultural protection. And again, that idea of what is the public benefit of protecting private land, which is really critical now, especially as we talk about things like 30 by 30, protecting 30% of the lands and waters by 2030, and thinking about what is the benefit of natural and working lands. And then we're going to continue to think about and tackle how to address urgent and emerging issues. And I think that these are things that we're seeing all the time that are popping up, whether it's weather related, whether it's economics related. We need to be able to be nimble. And as a nonprofit organization that has private funds, we are really in a flexible position to be the catalyst to help out with these emerging issues. And so we want to make sure that we continue to be a resource in this space, especially for our partners. So I will stop there and stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Lily. And we'll come back again and have a few questions. There's some nice ones in the Q&A already that I know Scott is going to help us with, and we've got a couple others to tackle. Let me invite up Nancy Scolari, who has been the executive director for the Marin Resource Conservation District for now over 20 years. It's safe to say Nancy and the Marin Resource Conservation District are a cornerstone for conservation and soil and water resource protection, and finding that nexus of achieving those goals on working ranches and farms. I just personally wanted to say I really value Nancy for being an insightful problem solver and always someone that follows through. And that comes through in all of the RCD's projects and why so many want to work with and partner with the Resource Conservation District. So Nancy, thank you for making time today, and the floor is yours.
All right, so let's see. Hopefully you're seeing my screen. There.
Yeah, but you should use the
There you go.
that's
Okay, got it. All right, so thank you so much for the opportunity to present today. I'm going to start with how we kind of came to be, and the Marin RCD came out of the Dust Bowl era. So way back to 1935, the nation decided that the state of our soils was of utmost importance to our livelihood. So at that point in time, there was in 1935, the Soil Conservation Act was formed, and that was a national policy and priority. In 1937, FDR recommended that states follow suit and create these locally sort of governed bodies that would help guide and facilitate the implementation of conservation across the landscapes. And it wasn't until 1959 that the Marin RCD was actually formed, and we're one of the sort of youngest RCDs across the country. Of California, what the legislator did was declare resource conservation of being of fundamental importance, and that the state must assume leadership and must cooperate with the federal government and with our resource conservation districts. And then just one example, but there are many different resource issues that we try to tackle, but that, you know, here's the protection and management of natural working lands as an important strategy in meeting the state's greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals. So that's sort of the legislative part of what we do. Locally, every RCD that's set up across the nation has their own mission statement and has very specific sort of duties that they take on. And no two are alike. They're all very different. And so ours here in Marin County, we have a different mission statement than the next county over. But it is basically the belief that the health of the county's natural landscape is dependent upon a robust agricultural economy and the active preservation of our agricultural heritage. It's our firm conviction that the ag productivity is dependent upon the diligent application of practices which conserve and enhance natural resources, and that these resources must benefit the public at large. Okay, so having said all of that and all of our responsibilities, we actually don't get any operating support from the state government or federal government. Each county decides how they might support their resource conservation districts. So fortunately in Marin County, we get $125,000 a year to help with our operating costs, which helps us write grants. And so we try to write grants like crazy, local, state, and federal grants. And so this is just a snapshot. It isn't what's here and now, but the types of grants that we get are all over the place. We get private foundation funding. We get state grants and federal grants. The exception, which is rather new to us, is Measure A. So we're able to tap into Measure A, and that will be ongoing for 9 years to help us with the work that we do. So that's kind of the funding side. We have a board of directors. We're the only board in the state of California, in the state of California that's actually elected into office. So they all represent sort of different parts of agriculture. Beef ranching, oysters, vegetables, dairy, eggs, except for Jerry. Jerry's more of the environmental policy side of things. So, and they serve 4-year terms, and they must be landowners in the district. We also have associate board members that help us with special projects. And we have a staff now of 10. As of in this last year, we hired on 5 people, and that's really because of Measure A being able to support our programs and staffing. So, so we're a pretty small district, and we have about 4 different primary programs that we work on. And the first 2 are very much ag focused. The number 3, the biomass project, is a very special project. It's taking a look at the sort of biomass across the county scale. The Urban Streams program is a very special contract that we have with the county that provides services around the Streamside Conservation Ordinance. But for this presentation, I'm going to really talk about the first 2, and one is our carbon farming program. And it's sort of set up to address climate change. And I'm kind of giving you the snapshot over a 15-year timeline. This program is something that we're just about ready to really springboard and launch into. But in 2007, it began with forming a Marin Carbon project, which is the panelists that you have today all participated and came to agreement about forming a group that would try to tackle this issue. And then in 2008 to 14, the group began to bring in UC Berkeley, UC Davis, and research institutions to try and test, out management practices and whether or not those practices could sequester carbon. What followed then was trying to scale up to demonstration farms and really, practicing some of those practices out on a farming scale. And then in 2020, the Marin County Climate Action Plan was revised to include many of the practices that were previously identified in research. And then from this point on, this year forward, we're actually going to be we're taking local Measure A funds, taking state coastal conservancy funding, and then also federal funding all together to try and implement these practices. So that's just a snapshot about sort of how we respond to some of the issues that come about. I'm really kind of focused on improving water quality next, and that's through our Conserving Our Watershed program. We have more history here, which is the 25-year timeline. And obviously there's much more to say about these issues, but I'm kind of zeroing in on sort of locally what we've accomplished here. So some of you may remember that about 200 people got sick in 1998 from eating oysters in Tamales Bay. And then in 1999, a Tomales Bay Watershed Council was formed. And then what followed was a Tomales Bay Plan, which identified agriculture as one of the source categories. And then water quality targets were set. And then the RCD and many of the partners here that you see supported the ag community to try to implement a number of different practices across the Tomales Bay watershed. And so some of that work were things like this, for example, a gully, and this is caused by a culvert coming off of Highway 1. And so we sort of come in to help that farmer or rancher deal with that problem, which would be a sediment issue, right, and help restore something like this. And these are all voluntary programs from willing landowners. Here's another example, and that previous project comes into this area, and this is a restoration project that helps, that has helped enhance this area for federally endangered shrimp and California threatened red-legged frogs, for example. Here's another restoration site, and this is the focus being on fisheries. So protecting endangered coho salmon and steelhead populations in parts of these watersheds. And the reasons for some of this are varied. Sometimes, in some instances, the county has come in historically to sort of, increase capacity of our channels. And so they're, removing vegetation. In some cases, it's generations of, this is what we thought was best. Maybe it was a property that was bought and is new, and so they're trying to repair it. But the reasons are many out there. We're also getting into hedgerows for pollinators, and so increasing biodiversity through some of these projects. And so all of those projects I showed you, those are all carbon sequestration projects. There are definitely more, there's a long list, but these are just some examples. And then through time, we try to see, how are we monitoring and adapting to some of this work? We look at before photos, what did it used to look like? Are we making improvements? We do landowner surveys, vegetation, and we work with partnering organizations, for example, like Point Blue Conservation Science to do bird counts, or we'll work with the water district to do fish counts. And then we try to follow the data that we don't collect ourselves, but that are collected by other organizations and agencies out there. So here is the Tomales Bay watershed water quality data. And so after all of that, $10 million has been spent over 20 years, and all of these 250 best management practices, what do we have to show for it? And so, the red shows you kind of what things look like before those water quality targets were set. And then the green shows you, this is what it looks like now. And so we're hoping that there are improvements that are made, and where there aren't improvements, what can we do better? So I guess all in all, in terms of challenges and opportunity, I think one of the opportunities before us is, I think there's hope in the water quality arena, that we're seeing improvements and that these practices are making a difference. And my hope is that we might be able to remove, some of the Tomales Bay watershed from the list of impaired water bodies. A challenge is meeting our new kind of greenhouse gas reduction goals. And then I think both a challenge and an opportunity is just a shared understanding between urban and rural communities about the importance of supporting each other in the protection of both natural resources and agriculture. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and give it to you, David.
Okay. I'm going to borrow 5 minutes and go ahead and give you all an overview of cooperative extension and the challenges and opportunities I wanted to bring to this conversation. And that'll leave us about 15 to do some conversation beyond that. So as I... Okay, so cooperative extension, our mission is really to serve as that bridge between a local county entity and the land grant mission of the University of California. We work across agricultural, natural, and human resources. The first land grant school, this is a national system, and every state has a land grant school. The first one in California was UC Berkeley, but it now is system-wide, 10 campuses with primary partners at Davis, Berkeley, Riverside, and most recently now Merced and Santa Cruz. The first advisor to live and work in Marin County was they came in 1920, and this is Merritt Boisevane. And today you may know us as 4-H, traditional 4-H projects, livestock projects at the fair, but 4-H is much more than that now, where we're in after-school programs, bringing science and technology, leadership skill building, goal setting to all of Marin's youth communities. And just as a plug for one of our programs coming up, if you've got youth that want to learn about STEM and get engaged, the North Marin Science Discovery Day is coming up March 11th at the Sonoma Fair. And this is a big event with over 70 exhibitors and Marin technology partners and others. You may also know us as the Marin Master Gardeners, where we have a help desk ready to answer your rose or tomato plant problem questions. We give home consultations on irrigation and proper use and conservation use of water. We also are there to help home owners and gardeners think about defensible space and how to design and maintain a landscape to be fire resilient. And in an urban setting, we're also over 120 of the Marin's community gardens, bringing technical assistance and helping with those growers make good choices and deal with pests and just generally build community around their gardens and what they grow. A core way we do our work is through our assigned advisors. We have over 8 advisors across Marin, Sonoma, and Napa that work in Marin. They're there to work with specific groups of clientele, from landscape care professionals on plant diseases. This is Stephen Swain, our horticulture advisor. But we get out on the landscape and we conduct research. In this case, we're researching how to manage using different management practices to manage distaff thistle, one of the more trickier thistles because it tends to cling on steep slopes and likes to be on thin soil. So it can really dig in places. And so we've done research and done education with Marin ranchers on options for managing that particular invasive weed. We're out in the field teaching dairy producers how to produce their own compost, and all of this is in partnership. I really want to iterate that this is done collectively with folks on this panel, but other partners as well. This is Randy Black, our dairy advisor, helping bring kind of the DIY of compost production on a dairy. There's multiple climate benefits to producing compost. It's also an option for bedding for dairy animals and can be cost effective. So working at that nexus of viability and stewardship is important for us. We take time to build working relationships with our county partners. This happens to again to be at the Hedron Meadery, where this is part of an 8-month process that we've taken county staff on brown bags and field tours to really learn about Marin agriculture and understand how their roles within county departments connects with agricultural projects and agricultural production, so that they're better equipped and ready to see those projects and manage those projects. For challenges, what you have here is the annual rainfall at Lagunitas Lake recorded by Marin Water. Back from 1878 all the way to 2022. Hopefully what you're seeing is the up and down and the extreme nature of it. And the fact that, some of you here on this call maybe were there for the droughts of 76, 77 here kind of in the first part of the last 2/3 where I'm waving my cursor. And if you compare that to the 2019 to 2022 rainfall, you can see that we're having more and more extreme events, and the extremeness between them relative to the first, say, 20, 30 years on this graph is even more pronounced. So that's a challenge. One of the ways we're helping to address that, but we have a lot of work to do, is we partnered, again, through the leadership of folks on this panel and others, to address those extreme events. And we've captured that effort over the last 3 years in this report that's coming out shortly. And this report also has recommendations how to continue to advance that resilience, that climate resilience and response to extreme dry and extreme wet years. And my other challenge and opportunity is really just to reinforce how Nancy finished. We can't stop connecting with each other and building shared understanding for the shared goals across the landscape. The goal to keep Marin's agricultural lands open and connected came about in the late 60s and early 70s. And that came about through in-depth debate and discussion, and then finally arriving at a decision. And then from then, we've been building on other shared goals, from habitat to climate management now. The Climate Action Plan for 2030 in Marin County sees that agriculture as a key partner in achieving climate action goals. So staying connected, days like today where we can share information and begin to open up dialogue, is really critical to maintaining how rural and urban communities, the agricultural community and the residential communities work together and understand each other and work towards shared goals. So I will stop my share. And at 1:15, I'm going to say, Scott, there are some really wonderful questions in the Q&A that I would really want to get to and not let hanging. So thank you for your time. And please, how would you like us to proceed? Which question?
You are correct, David. Lots of questions, and I don't know if we're going to get to them all. I'm going to do my best to try and put them out there. Let me just suggest that we try to keep the answers brief so that we can get through as many of these as possible. And I know, by the way, some of you have submitted questions on the Point Reyes ranching lease issues. And as I mentioned at the start, that's really not the focus for today. So we're going to save those questions for a future program that we hope to present. But in the meantime, let me jump into this. We have questions from a number of folks. Carol Randall asks, what would make agriculture appealing and newsworthy to anti-ranch bias in press articles and reader letters? Obviously, she's noting that there is a certain amount of negative viewpoints on agriculture in the press. I don't know that that's from the press. I think they're reporting what's out there in the public. But any thoughts on that for anybody on the panel?
I'll start, and then we can have others add. You know, I work closely, and some of the research Nancy referenced about riparian restoration and watershed management. We know we have probably now approaching 30 miles of restored stream, and providing habitat, preventing sediment from going down into the waterway and impacting salmonid habitat, but also capturing carbon in a way that surpasses other kinds of emissions reductions goals. So there's lots of shared goals that we can achieve that would, I think, be really appealing for the community. I don't know about the press, but the community to learn about and even get behind. And so maybe I'll stop there and see what other things Lily or Nancy, Andy, Stefan, you want to share?
Yeah, I can jump in. Thanks, David. And it's such a great question. And I've been thinking about it so much in the context of Malt's work in Marin, but also in my 20 plus years of doing conservation work. I've been working with farmers and ranchers because there's such a natural partner in conservation. And it is about this large scale conservation of the landscape. And how do we do it where we're incorporating natural and working lands? And going back to that idea of the public benefit of protecting private lands and having this, the foods and agriculture in our backyard is really critical for so many reasons. And so being able to tell that entire story, as opposed to just looking at the narrow idea of that there's farming and ranching in a community, it's okay, well, what do we get from that? We get so much. We get, local food and fiber, we get the climate benefit, we get the vistas and the open space aspect, we get climate benefits, biodiversity, the connectivity. I think one of the things that I didn't mention much of, but is that connectivity and thinking about how these landscapes now are not developed in West Marin. And so that allows for a significant amount of migratory habitat for large species like mountain lions, but also a buffer for when we do have climate impacts and allowing animals to move throughout to find water, to get relief and protection from extreme conditions. And so there is that natural resilience built up in the buffer when we have ag lands. And so that's the place that I like to come from. And I think we're getting some really good communication too from the state and the federal government now that there is that talk about 30 by 30, about natural and working lands, about those benefits of what it is to protect open space as a whole. And I think that fire buffer is also a big one too, that we feel on a regular basis here, and thinking about how we can build resilience and have fire breaks and ag lands provide that as well.
Okay,
Yeah,
good. I'm sorry, go ahead, Nancy. Well, actually, you know what, Nancy, the next question's for you. So let me throw this out, and then you can integrate your comments with your answer to Daniel Bell's question, which is, can you discuss possible financial, you've talked about this, so I don't know that you need to necessarily repeat everything you've already said on the question, but he says, can you discuss possible future financial gains to Marin ranches from carbon sequestration programs? And then whatever else you wanted to add about the last question.
Sure. Okay. So just to speak a little bit about the connectivity, about how are we all connected here, I just want to emphasize that, you know, we are all in this together because, you know, I'll just use dams as an example. You know, we have reservoirs across the county, and those reservoirs are providing a really important resource to everybody, right? So the public at large. And however, those reservoirs are also have damaged our watersheds in both upstream, downstream, on agricultural lands. And those are things that we're trying to fix. So, you know, that's what I mean by we're all in it together. So I hope that at some point we can all see that, you know, that even though we benefit from some of these resources, that we all have a shared responsibility in addressing some of the damage that has been done, whether it was done, you know, historically by any one person or collectively. So having said that, how do we finance these programs? And so I think that's where it comes into a lot of our grant programs are financing some of this work. So a lot of the carbon sequestration programs that you see out there, they're all cost share programs. So the applicant shares the cost of the practice, and then as does the agency that's providing the funding. So the federal government has a cost share program. It's called Environmental Quality Incentives Program. The state, California Department of Food and Ag has a program called the Healthy Soils Program. And then locally, usually it's funding that we are, whether it's through Marin Agricultural Land Trust or through the Marin Resource Conservation District, which we get through grants. We're trying to provide cost share funds to do a lot of the practices that I showed you earlier in those pictures. The amount of cost share varies. You know, either can be 50% of the cost, or it can be as much as 100% of the cost if you're talking about a practice which is really solely for wildlife or wetland enhancement. So it's all over the place, but that just gives you a snapshot of how that funding comes about.
Okay, great. Let me move to Andy. We have a question I think would probably be best for you, but others might have some thoughts on it as well. Our questioner asks, I recently spent a couple of days at Marin General Hospital. I found it appalling that people whose health is in that fragile and vulnerable a state were not being served organic food. Are there any plans for local organic farmers to collaborate with medical providers and hospitals to provide organic food service in Marin medical facilities?
Yeah, that's a good question. So actually every Friday we bring our Roll and Root mobile market to Marin General. We're there at 1 o'clock. So it's one way for both hospital staff and patients to access local organic food. So, but from a broader perspective, much of the focus right now has been on farm to school. There's a lot of significant investments to help more local school districts buy products from local farmers. There are some movements underway to help better link hospitals and healthcare systems with local foods. One of the problems that we run into is that many of the reimbursements are not based on organic pricing. It's often tied to conventional pricing. So it can be a challenge from an affordability perspective, but there is there's a new change in California. It's a new program called CalAIM, and it's actually a way that hospitals and healthcare providers will be able to bill Medicaid or Medi-Cal in California for nutritious foods. And so there's different programs like food pharmacies that are popping up now too. So there's some of that underway, but when we open our Center for Food and Agriculture in 2025, we are looking to work with more institutional and bulk purchasers where they could come to the center and be able to buy from multiple different farmers to reach the volume that's needed. So more to come on that, but catch the Roll and Root every Friday afternoon at Marin General at 1 o'clock.
All right, next question. It's more a statement, but this is for Stefan, and you might have a comment on it, Stefan. Another environmental protection program that you will be enforcing when it goes into effect next year is the new Marin County Foodware Ordinance. I'm not aware of that, but any comment?
I'll just say that actually it's the Marin County Environmental Health Division that will be enforcing those regulations.
Okay, that's quick. Wrapping up, we're going to have just a couple of minutes here. We might run a little bit over, but let me just try and get a couple more in. This is sort of a question, I guess, taking off from what we heard Lily describe in terms of some of the environmental practices that are intended to counteract some of the degradation that has occurred in the past. What specific steps can be taken or are already in practice to make agricultural lands more hospitable to and supportive of wildlife? You've already touched on that, but anything else you'd care to add? And then secondly, what practices are in place to reduce the environmental impact of farming generally, such as use of insecticides, fertilizer, et cetera? And then, well, actually, let me just let it go at that, and then we can go on to the next after that.
I can start with that one, and maybe Lily can follow. So a lot of what I showed you in the photos, what that involves, if you're really looking into the details, is taking a lot of those stretches of creek, determining kind of what has to happen there, which requires hydrology and engineering. We will put up fences to exclude cattle from those areas. Anytime you exclude cattle from an area, you have to give them an alternative water source. So we'll get, sort of tanks and troughs kind of set off the stream so that you don't have those livestock impacting in stream areas. If there is fisheries enhancement that takes place, we'll work on doing that with contractors and biologists to get that going. And then for biodiversity, there's a lot of hedgerows and windbreaks that we try to install. And all of those practices, we use partners. So folks like the Point Blue Conservation Science and their biologists help us design out those particular projects so that we're using all native plant species. And we're really sort of maximizing for whatever the species is in that particular spot. So if it is for coho salmon, what are the plant species that we need to be designing in that particular area? Or, are we really looking at monarch butterflies? Okay, so then that hedgerow needs to be designed to really have that monarch butterfly flourish, right, at all times of the year or certain times of the year. So we try to be very specific about how those sites are designed, but those are just some examples.
I think too that one of building on what Nancy just described is that a lot of this is done in partnership, and that all of the groups here plus Point Blue and other folks are working together and to offset the impact of the cost and then the lift of the private landowner. And so there's a lot of different ways that we're all working together. I think a great example is that that Malt can come in and help kick off a project with private funding from our draws program, and then the RCD then comes in and starts and takes up where we left off and funds the broader project with public funding that can be a little bit more slow. And so there's ways that we're all collaborating, and the timing of these projects is really speaks so well to the tight-knit community out here and how well the organizations are all able to move together to better the stewardship of the land. So then you do get those outcomes of the biodiversity outcomes and the climate outcomes, and it's ongoing and it's a continued support. And so I think that that's one of the most pieces that I've been impressed with of this community, is that really that kind of continued integration of how we bring all the resources to the table to better support our farmers and our ranchers.
Okay, I'm going to throw in one more question. First of all, there were a lot of questions that were really excellent. I'm sorry we didn't get to them all. I think a lot of them touched on similar issues, and hopefully we were able to combine enough of them to get the general gist of what you've been curious about into the conversation. And I know that we couldn't have covered it all, but let me end with one last question. Nona Dennis asks, I'm sorry, I'll get to that in a second. First, a question from Brant Miller. Lots of very good things happening, obviously, but there was no discussion of how it is financed. Where does the money come from? So let me just throw that out for a minute or two, and then we'll wrap up after that.
I want to just reiterate, and I share that, Nancy described cost share and the ways that federal and state and even Measure A funds are coming to this. Lily just shared how some of their private donations are helping to start projects like that drought resistance and drought response program. So that's where some of that finance is coming from. I think, Andy, you shared the ways in which a fundraising for the Center for Food and Ag is incrementally tapping into different sources, including private philanthropy. So I don't want to state from a partners where and how this all creatively merges and bridges, but it takes a lot of different efforts, a lot of different interests, and a lot of active grant writing and communicating the stories to be able to finance all of this.
All right, thank you for that review, David, and I appreciate everybody's contributions on that topic. And I think, if you go through this program in the recording, which will be on our archives, you'll be able to hear again some of the details on where some of the financing is coming from. So let me just end with Nona Dennis's observation. It's not a question. She says, Wendell Berry reminds us that, quote, eating is an agricultural act, close quote. Please remind today's audience of their dependence on our farmers. All right, I think that's an appropriate way to turn this off. I'm going to thank all of our panelists for what I know everyone enjoyed as a very informative program, a very well presented program. And I thank all of our presenters for the time that they spent preparing this and coming to join us today to present it. Thank you, David Lewis, Andy Najariz, Stefan Parnay, Lily Verdone, Nancy Scolari. This will be in the recorded archives on our webpage. I'd also like to thank our webmaster, Alan Shavitz, for another flawless program, our program chair, Kevin Haggerty, and our director, Pat Randolph, for helping to put this program together. Thanks to all of you for watching. I hope it was time that you felt was well spent. I certainly did. And we're looking forward to seeing you next time. Our next event, again, March 23rd. The topic will be policing in Marin, and we hope to see you then. Thanks all for joining us. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.